The first time my husband admitted he liked knowing I wasn't only his. I actually didn't know how to respond. I just stared at him. Because here's the thing about desire, it feels completely different when it's encouraged instead of hidden. This wasn't about cheating. This wasn't about rebellion. This was his idea. His encouragement. His genuine enjoyment of my freedom. And what happened next? It transformed our marriage in ways I never saw coming. If you've ever wondered what happens when traditional rules get rewritten by mutual trust, keep watching. Because this story isn't what you think it is. This is the story of how permission became our greatest intimacy. And I promise, by the end of this video, you'll understand why sometimes the deepest connection comes not from holding on, but from letting go. Let me take you back to where this all began. It wasn't some dramatic revelation or midnight confession. It started much more quietly than that. With curiosity. The kind of curiosity that lives in the spaces between comfortable silences. We were at a friend's wedding, one of those beautiful outdoor ceremonies where everything feels golden and possible. I was dancing with an old college friend, someone I hadn't seen in years. The dance was innocent, friendly, but there was that subtle energy that sometimes exists between people who once knew each other in a different context. Later, driving home in that contented silence that follows a good celebration, my husband said something unexpected. Not, "Were you flirting?" Not, "That seemed close." But, "I noticed how he looked at you while you were dancing." I tensed, waiting for the follow-up. The judgment. The subtle accusation. Instead, he continued, his voice thoughtful. "It was interesting to watch. The way his attention was completely on you. What did that feel like from your side?" That was the first hint. That curiosity. Not jealous. Not threatened. Genuinely curious. In the weeks that followed, these moments accumulated. A colleague complimented my work in a meeting, and my husband asked, "What did it feel like to have your professional competence acknowledged like that?" A stranger held eye contact a beat too long at a coffee shop, and he wondered, "Does that kind of attention feel different now than it did when we were dating?" The questions were always asked casually. Almost carefully. As if he was conducting some gentle anthropological study of my experience of being a woman in the world. He wasn't monitoring me, he was learning me. And I realized he was learning parts of me that even I didn't fully understand. After about 2 months of this gentle questioning, always about my feelings, never about the other person's intentions, I found myself sitting with a growing confusion. What was this about? Why this sudden interest in how I experienced attention from others? One evening, we were cooking dinner together. The familiar rhythm of chopping vegetables, the sizzle of onions in the pan, the comfortable silence of a shared domestic task. I decided to be brave. "Why do you care so much?" I asked, my voice quieter than I intended. "About how it feels when other people notice me?" He didn't answer immediately. He finished stirring the onions, turned down the heat, and wiped his hands on a towel. Then he turned to face me, leaning against the counter. "I've been thinking about that myself," he said, his expression serious but open. "And I think I'm trying to understand something about desire. Not just sexual desire, but human desire. The way we want to be seen, to be desired. And you're my window into that experience." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "When we got married, I think I unconsciously assumed I would be the only source of that feeling for you. The only one whose desire mattered. But that's not realistic, is it? Or even fair. You exist in the world. People notice you. You notice them. That's human." I just stared at him, the wooden spoon in my hand forgotten. This wasn't the conversation I'd prepared for. I'd prepared for defensiveness, for jealousy, for reassurance. I hadn't prepared for philosophy. A week later, we had the conversation that changed everything. We were on a weekend getaway, sitting on a cabin porch overlooking a lake. The sun was setting, painting the water in oranges and purples. That golden hour when truths feel safer to speak. He brought it up again. "I've been thinking more about what we talked about," he said, his eyes on the water rather than on me, which made the conversation feel less confrontational. "I want to tell you something," he continued. "And I want you to know I've thought about this a lot before saying it." I waited, my heart doing a strange little dance in my chest. "I like knowing you're desired," he said, the words clear and deliberate in the quiet evening air. "Even when that desire doesn't belong to me alone." I actually blinked, certain I'd misheard. "You like it?" He nodded, finally looking at me. "It doesn't threaten me. It interests me. It makes me see you differently. You're not just my wife in our private life. You're a woman who moves through the world and affects people. That's powerful. And honestly, it's attractive. I was speechless. This contradicted everything I'd been taught about marriage, about possession, about jealousy as proof of love. He wasn't pretending not to care, he was genuinely interested. And not in a creepy, voyeuristic way. In a respectful, almost reverent way. Why, was all I could manage. Because your aliveness turns me on, he said simply. And part of your aliveness comes from existing as a full person in the world, not just as half of a couple. In that moment on the porch, with the last light of day fading over the lake, I felt the entire power dynamic of our relationship shift. Not dramatically, but fundamentally. Permission wasn't something I was extracting from him through negotiation or guilt. It wasn't something he was reluctantly granting. Permission was his idea. His encouragement. His genuine interest. This changed everything about how that permission felt. It wasn't a concession, it was an offering. It wasn't me pushing against boundaries, it was him expanding the field. I realized that power in relationships doesn't always look like control. Sometimes it looks like creating so much safety that control becomes unnecessary. Sometimes the most powerful position isn't being the one who restricts, but being the one who allows, and finds genuine enjoyment in that allowance. That night, for the first time, I saw my husband not just as my partner, but as someone secure enough in himself and in us to want my full flourishing, even when that flourishing happened in spaces he didn't personally occupy. And that security was more attractive than any display of possessive jealousy could ever be. In the days that followed, we began to build a new framework. But interestingly, he didn't approach it by setting rules. He approached it by creating space. We don't need rules, he said one evening. We need understanding. We need honesty. We need to keep checking in with each other. The space he created had 3 dimensions. First, space for honesty. Complete, radical honesty. Not just about actions, but about feelings, uncertainties, contradictions. The messy, complicated truth of being human. Second, space for choice. Real choice. Not choice between right and wrong, but conscious choice about what would serve my growth, our growth. Third, space for return. The understanding that whatever I explored, I would return. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to. And that return would be met with curiosity, not interrogation. This framework felt entirely different from the don't ask, don't tell policies or strict rule sets I'd heard about in other non-traditional relationships. This was about consciousness, not permission slips. This was about mutual growth, not negotiated freedoms. He was essentially saying, I trust you to navigate your own. The first time I went out with this new consciousness was surreal. I was meeting a former colleague, someone I'd always had intellectual chemistry with, for dinner. In the past, I would have approached this with either guilt, if I found him attractive, or complete innocence, if I convinced myself it was purely professional. But this time was different. I wasn't sneaking. I wasn't rebelling against unspoken rules. I wasn't pretending it was something it wasn't. I was doing exactly what my husband wanted me to do, being honest with my own experience. As I got ready, I paid attention to my own motivations. Why was I looking forward to this dinner? What was I hoping to experience? What parts of myself did I want to bring to the conversation? During the dinner itself, I was more aware of myself than ever before. Every interaction felt intentional. Every moment of connection felt conscious. Because I wasn't hiding anything, not from my colleague, not from my husband, and most importantly, not from myself. When my colleague made a particularly insightful comment about my work, and I felt that spark of intellectual recognition, that you see me feeling, I didn't quickly shut it down. I allowed myself to feel it. To notice it. To appreciate it. And in that allowance, something shifted. The experience became less about him and more about my own capacity for connection. He was the mirror, I was the one being reflected. The most profound moment came toward the end of the evening. We were talking about creative blocks, something I'd been struggling with in my work. My colleague, who's an artist, shared a technique that had helped him. It's about finding where the fear lives in the body, he said, his voice earnest. Not just intellectually understanding it, but physically locating it. Then breathing into that space. As he described the technique, he reached out and gently touched my forearm, just for a second, to demonstrate where he meant. It wasn't a romantic touch. It wasn't a come on. It was a teacher's touch, meant to illustrate a point. But something happened in that moment. Something emotional opened in me. Not sexual attraction, but human recognition. The feeling of being truly seen and understood in a struggle. That emotional touch, that moment of genuine human connection, stayed with me. It wasn't about him, it was about what he helped me access in myself. A vulnerability I hadn't realized I was guarding. On the drive home, I sat with that feeling. Not analyzing whether it was appropriate, but simply experiencing what it had stirred in me. And I realized, this was exactly what my husband had been curious about. These subtle shifts. These openings. These moments when connection touches something deep. When I got home, he was reading in his usual chair. He looked up, smiled. "How was your dinner?" I took a moment, settling into the feeling of being home. "It was interesting," I said, sitting across from him. He closed his book, giving me his full attention. Not anxious attention. Curious attention. I told him about the conversation, about the creative block discussion, about the moment of connection. When I described the touch, the emotional touch, not physical in any romantic sense, I watched his face carefully. He didn't flinch. He didn't tense. He leaned in. "Tell me more about that moment," he said, his voice soft. "What did it feel like when he understood something about your creative struggle?" So I did. I described the physical sensation, the warmth of recognition flooding through me. The emotional sensation, the relief of being seen in a vulnerability. The psychological sensation, the shift from guarded to open. As I spoke, I could see him listening on multiple levels. Hearing my words. Watching my body language. Sensing the energy in the room. And I could tell, actually feel, that hearing this affected him deeply. Not in a threatened way. In a connected way. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said something I'll never forget. "Thank you for sharing that with me. For trusting me with that part of your experience." That exchange became a pattern. Not frequent, these meaningful connections don't happen every day, but consistent. And through them, I began to understand what he really wanted. It wasn't competition. He didn't want to win against other men. He didn't need to be the best or the only. He wanted contrast. He liked knowing that another man could experience a side of me, the intellectually vulnerable side, the creatively struggling side, the professionally ambitious side, and that experience would be unique to that connection. Different from what he experienced with me. Not better. Not worse. Different. And then, after having that different experience, I would come home. Not reluctantly. Not guiltily. But willingly. Choosing him. Choosing us. Choosing to bring whatever I had discovered back into our shared space. That choice, he explained one night, mattered more to him than exclusivity ever had. Exclusivity is passive, he said. It's the default when there are rules. But choice is active. It's conscious. Every time you come home after one of these connections, you're not just returning to what's familiar. You're choosing what's meaningful. And that means more. I began to see that his enjoyment wasn't about sharing me in some superficial sense. It was about witnessing me navigate the full complexity of being human, and still choosing the particular complexity of our life together. The more open we became in this process, the more he enjoyed the listening. Not the details of what happened, but the feelings. The reactions. The subtle shifts in how desire, for connection, for understanding, for recognition, moved through me. Our conversations after my experiences became some of our most intimate moments. Not sexually intimate, though sometimes that followed naturally, but psychologically intimate. Soul intimate. He would ask questions that showed he was truly listening. How did your energy change when you realized he understood you? What part of yourself felt most seen in that conversation? Where in your body did you feel that spark of recognition? These questions weren't voyeuristic. They were reverent. They treated my inner experience as sacred territory worth exploring with care and respect. And my willingness to be that honest, to articulate feelings that most people keep private even from themselves, created a level of trust that felt almost spiritual. We were seeing each other completely. No masks. No performances. Just two humans trying to understand the mystery of connection. This listening became our new intimacy. Deeper than physical intimacy because it included everything, the mind, the heart, the soul. And through that intimacy, our physical connection actually deepened too, because it was now informed by this profound psychological transparency. Here's the paradox that emerged. Through giving me complete freedom, my husband experienced a sense of control that was more profound than any possession-based control could ever be. But it wasn't control over me. It was control over the narrative. Control over the meaning. In traditional relationships, control often looks like, "You can't do that." Restriction. Possession. Fear-based boundaries. But his control looked like, "I trust you to do that, and I trust us to integrate whatever you discover." Expansion. Trust. Love-based freedom. This control through trust gave him a deep sense of security. Because he knew I wasn't hiding anything. He knew I was being completely honest about my experiences, my feelings, my struggles. There were no secrets, no hidden compartments of my life. And in that complete transparency, he found a safety that restrictive rules could never provide. Rules can be broken secretly. But trust, when it's this deep, creates its own accountability, not through fear of getting caught, but through respect for the sacredness of the connection. One night, after a particularly meaningful sharing session, I asked him, "Does it ever make you anxious? This freedom?" He thought for a moment. "The opposite, actually. It makes me feel secure. Because I know you're not here out of obligation or fear. You're here because, with all the options in the world, this is what you choose." That's more reassuring than any promise or rule could ever be. As time went on, I had a realization that changed how I saw our entire dynamic. His enjoyment wasn't about losing me or sharing me in some superficial sense. His enjoyment was about witnessing me. Seeing me desired, not just sexually, but intellectually, emotionally, creatively. Seeing me affect people. Seeing me exist as a full person in the world, not just as his wife in our private life. And then, witnessing me take all that aliveness and bring it home. To him. To us. He explained it once, "When you come home after one of these connections, you're not just the woman I married. You're that woman plus whatever that experience awakened in you. And I get to meet that expanded version of you. That's a gift." I realized that what he enjoyed was the evolution. My evolution. Our evolution. The fact that we weren't stuck in static roles, but were growing, changing, expanding, together, but also as individuals. His enjoyment was about being married to a woman who was fully alive, and knowing that his love wasn't what confined her, but what gave her the safety to explore that aliveness completely. The power in our relationship became quiet but intense. It lived in the choice. The daily, conscious choice. Every time I went out into the world with this freedom, I was making a choice. Every connection I explored, I was making a choice. And every return home, I was making the most important choice, the choice of us. This wasn't the dramatic power of forbidden passion or rebellious secrecy. This was the quiet power of conscious living. Of choosing each part of my life with awareness rather than defaulting to rules or expectations. And this power extended to him too. Every day, he was choosing to trust. Choosing to be secure rather than jealous. Choosing to be curious rather than threatened. Choosing to find my freedom attractive rather than frightening. Our relationship became a series of conscious choices rather than unconscious habits. And that consciousness made everything more vibrant, more meaningful, more alive. The quiet power of choice also changed how I moved through the world. I wasn't looking for validation or escape. I was simply being, with the awareness that every connection, every moment, was part of my conscious journey. And that journey always led back home. Paradoxically, this freedom, this knowing that I wasn't his alone, brought us closer than ever before. Closer than when we were possessive. Closer than when we operated from jealousy or fear. We became closer because, first, we had complete honesty. No hidden parts. No secret compartments. We knew each other completely, the desires, the fears, the contradictions, everything. Second, we had conscious choice. We weren't together out of habit or obligation. We were together because, with all options available, this was what we both kept choosing. Third, we had evolving identities. We weren't stuck in the roles of husband and wife. We were two individuals growing alongside each other, sharing that growth with radical transparency. Fourth, we had earned trust. Not the naive trust of early love, but the earned trust that comes from navigating complexity together and coming out stronger. People sometimes ask if I feel like our connection is diluted by these other connections. The opposite is true. Our connection is concentrated. It's the center that holds all the other connections. It's the home base that makes exploration possible. My husband didn't want me untouched by the world. He wanted me touched by it, intellectually, emotionally, creatively, and still choosing to bring all of that back to him. Back to us. And in that bringing back, in that sharing, we found an intimacy that exclusive possession could never have given us. It's been several years now since that first admission on the cabin porch. The landscape of our marriage has been completely transformed, not into something unrecognizable, but into something more deeply itself. We still have a traditional marriage in many ways. We share a home, a life, dreams, responsibilities. We're committed, monogamous in our emotional primacy. But the foundation of that commitment has shifted from possession to choice. From fear to trust. From restriction to freedom. The most lasting transformation has been in me. I'm more confident, not because I'm desired by others, but because I understand my own desires more clearly. I'm more authentic, because I'm not hiding parts of myself to fit into a role. I'm more present in my marriage, because I'm not secretly longing for freedom. And the most lasting transformation in him? He's more secure. Not the false security of control, but the deep security of knowing he's chosen, consciously, daily, by someone who has the freedom to choose otherwise. My husband didn't want me untouched by the world. He wanted me honest with myself about my experience in the world. And that honesty, that radical, vulnerable, courageous honesty, became the thread that wove us together more tightly than any promise of exclusivity ever could. Because here's the truth I discovered: when someone loves you enough to want your full aliveness, even when that aliveness exists beyond them, that's not permission. That's the deepest form of love there is. It's love that says, I want all of you. Even the parts that don't belong only to me. And that kind of love changes everything.